Hey guys, it's Zach here, and I'm back again with another video. So today it's going to be a little bit different to the content I normally do on this channel, but I wanted to talk about some of the announcements from Apple's WWDC Worldwide Developers Conference that they had last week from June 22nd to the 26th. And I wanted to kind of talk about a few things that pertain more to accessibility, because there are a lot of videos already from very, very cool people that know quite a bit about Apple for all the mainstream kind of features in like iOS 14 and watchOS and macOS Big Sur, which is the new macOS 11 that's coming out soon. But I haven't seen a ton of videos on YouTube about accessibility, so I wanted to kind of chime in with some stuff that I've learned and that other people have learned over the past week or so about all of the really interesting accessibility features coming in some of these updates. So I just want to start this off by saying that we don't know everything just yet. A lot of the stuff, especially regarding macOS, is not known at this time. I'm not aware of any accessibility changes in macOS. I mean, there's like a few things that are very minor regarding like Braille and being able to do some things with that, but I'm not aware in terms of the operating system and Voiceover if there are any changes. I'm sure there probably are. I think it's just that we don't know what they are yet. And I also just want to quickly say, because I don't really see this being brought up right now, that this is still very much beta software, and it's very, very early days, especially for iOS and macOS, which are very big new releases. So this stuff could change, and I also just want to quickly, just a disclaimer, I don't have access to any of the beta software right now. I'm not an Apple developer. I'm not in the I don't think I'm going to be doing the public beta program this year. So I'm just sort of talking about information that's already known in terms of stuff that has been posted online and on Twitter, on social media about all these features. So I myself have not tested any of this, but I want to talk about it to make my viewers aware, and anyone else who's interested, aware of these features, because I don't see them being talked about very often on YouTube. So I just figured it would be a good time to make a long format video all about some of these cool features. All right, so with that all out of the way, let's first start on watchOS. I'm kind of saving the best for last here, and I think you'll see why. So watchOS has Braille support now. So if you have an Apple Watch and you are deafblind, or you just want to use a Braille display with your watch for whatever reason, you can do that. I don't know how practical this is. I was listening to a demo of it like a week ago that this really cool guy, David Woodbridge, actually put together. He has a podcast all about different kinds of technology, and for people who are interested, I will put a link to that in the description. But he did a demo of Braille support on the watch, and it works very well from what I was able to listen to. It's very similar to how it works on iOS. So for people that have used Braille displays on iOS before, you're able to type and navigate and read. But again, unless you have an iPhone that you already have a Braille display connected to, I don't really see much benefit if you are deafblind, and let's say you have a Braille display, but you don't want to use it with your iPhone for whatever reason, but you just want to use it with your watch. So say if you wanted to leave your phone at home and go on a run or something with your watch, that would be very impractical to do with a Braille display. Even a small one, I feel like it would be kind of a pain. I mean, maybe you could do it with like a 12-cell display or something, but it's still very good that they've included this. I'm not knocking them at all. It's very, very thoughtful of them to make sure that everyone is able to access this technology. I'm just kind of thinking long term in terms of, because the watch is really designed more for health and working out and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how I don't know how practical that would be with a Braille display, in addition to you having to do all the, you know, fitness and everything. But, you know, time will tell. Maybe this will force Braille display companies to make even tinier displays. We'll see. But it's really awesome, and I wanted to kind of mention that. So the other thing that's cool on the watch is you're finally getting the rotor, if you're familiar with iOS or macOS, or actually even tvOS as well. And for people that aren't, the rotor is a feature in VoiceOver that lets you navigate by different elements. So say you're on a website and you want to navigate just by links. You want to see all of the links on a page. So you can turn the rotor to links, and then you can move up and down through all of those links. And the rotor kind of works like a dial on like one of those old radios, to tune the stations. Basically, the way it works is you put 2 fingers, if you have an iPhone or something with a touch screen, you put 2 fingers on the screen, and you turn as though you're turning a dial. So just imagine you have like a volume knob, right? And you're turning that, or like a radio tuning dial, and you're turning that. So you would do the same thing just with your 2 fingers. So that will activate the rotor, and then that will let you navigate to different elements on the page. And now the watch has the same thing. So if you need to spell something, or navigate by line, or any number of things, you're able to do that now from the watch, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of all I have for watchOS, but now let's talk a little more about macOS. There's one thing that I'm aware of. Well, there are a few things, but I'll get to the other one later. But there's one thing that I'm aware of. If you are a Braille display user, and I believe this might also be on iOS as well, but I could be wrong. But if you're a Braille display user and you use different Braille tables, so if you need to have one for, say, contracted Braille and one for uncontracted Braille, like if you are using, let's say, grade 2, and then you need one for grade 1 Braille, you can switch to those in the rotor now with VoiceOver, so you're able to get to those more quickly. Or if you need to have them for different languages, you can do that. So if you need one for English and then one for, say, German, for example, you could do that, which is pretty cool, and that might help some people. I'm not sure about the whole contracted, uncontracted Braille thing. I would assume that would also be supported, but I'm not 100%. I think it's mainly meant more for languages, though. So if you need to have, like, English and Italian, you can do that. And now we're going to move to iOS. And this is where I'm going to spend some time because there's quite a bit here. So on iOS, first of all, I'm just trying to kind of remember here. So they've done some very interesting things with the back of your phone. And that might sound a little weird, but I'll explain. So they have a new accessibility feature. This isn't specifically for VoiceOver users, but it does kind of apply, and I'll tell you why in a second. So if you have an iPhone 10 or later, so the ones without the home button, you are able to tap the back of your phone to do certain things, and they call this back tap. And it's designed for people who have motor impairments, but I think a lot of people are going to use this. I certainly will set this up for sure. And you can assign it to do any number of things. You can have it scroll up and down. So if you are in a long list and you don't like doing the 3-finger flick gestures with VoiceOver running to scroll up and down through a very, very long list, you can do this instead, and it might actually speed your workflow up, which is really awesome. There's a ton more. You can assign it to do different VoiceOver gestures. So I guess if you would want to do, say, like a read all, I'm just guessing here, you'd be able to assign that. And the gestures you can use, by the way, so for the back tap feature, is a double tap on the back of your phone or a triple tap on the back of your phone. So you have 2 options there. And here's the really interesting part. You can use Apple's Shortcuts app, which is an app that lets you kind of make like automated tasks. So let's say, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say you want to check the weather and take that information that you get from checking the weather and send it to someone. You could do that with shortcuts, theoretically, if you set it up right. So I could say, check how hot it's going to be outside in terms of degrees, and then get that information and put it on the clipboard, for example, then have it open up a message to somebody and paste it in so that I could send them a message telling them how hot it would be for the day if that was something they were interested in. Just an example. There's a host of things you can do. You can have it open up apps. You can have it integrate with a ton of different services. It's a very powerful application. And so this back tap feature works with shortcuts to let you run any shortcut that you make. So if you make a shortcut to say, check the weather, for example, and you want to do that really quickly without needing to find the weather app and open the weather app and then, find the city that you want and then check the weather, you can just double tap the back of your phone and you can tell it to do whatever you want. So I could say, okay, find my current location, get the weather for my current location, and display it in a nice sort of easy view that I can understand, and only display this information and don't display anything else. And so it's very powerful. It's almost like making your own apps in a way. It's like the Xcode before Xcode. So Xcode, for anyone who doesn't know, is Apple's development environment for people to make applications for iOS and macOS. So any app that you download from the App Store was made in Xcode, and it's free, and you can get started with it and start programming apps if you learn Swift, which is their programming language that Apple uses for, I think, most of their apps now. So it's really powerful and very accessible as well. They've made sure to have it be as usable for someone who's blind as possible, so we can do whatever we need to in shortcuts, and it's quite fun. I'm actually planning on getting more into it, especially when this latest update comes out, because there are a lot of features in shortcuts that they've added in more for this recent update, and I'm really excited to check them out. And if anyone is interested, I will gladly do a video on shortcuts when the new update comes out. So that's Backtap. Now we're going to move to Voiceover, and this is the big feature that a lot of people are talking about. So they have a new feature that's powered by AI and machine learning, which are buzzwords that we hear all the time now, and they call it voiceover recognition. Now, what is this feature? Well, let's have a little bit of an explanation, because this actually goes a little bit further back than some people might realize. So back in iOS 11, I believe, yeah, iOS 11, Apple introduced a feature to have VoiceOver attempt to describe images that it saw on the screen. So, for example, if you had an image of, say, someone sitting at a table drinking some water, right? VoiceOver would look at that image and go, okay, so it looks like this person, there's a person there, and it looks like they have water, and it looks like maybe there's a chair and a table, right? So what it will do is it will just kind of tell you like the objects that it will see in the image. So it'll just say like person, chair, table, cup, or something like that, or water or something. And as you can imagine, probably it wasn't very useful. It was interesting, and definitely when it first came out, I was actually really impressed. I was like, whoa, it's able to kind of give me some info about what's going on. That's really, really cool. But as it kept going, I found it to not be very useful. And another thing it could do before I forget is it was also able to try and identify any text that was in the image. This was a little more useful, but it didn't really work very well. So like, for example, if you had an image of like a book with some writing in it, it would try sometimes to OCR the writing, so it would perform optical character recognition, where basically a computer is able to take a picture of some print and then figure out what the letters are to read that print. And so it was able to take a picture, essentially, and attempt to identify if there was any text, and if there was, it would try and read it. And that worked okay, actually, but it was still not very good. It would not read everything, and depending on how the picture looked and had been taken, it was not the most reliable. So that didn't work very well. Then in iOS 12 and 13, I think they may have tried to improve it. I believe in 13, I think it was 13, they tried to make it better, and it still, to this day, is not very good. But that's all about to change with iOS 14 and voiceover recognition. So let's break this down a little bit. Voiceover recognition has 3 components. We have image recognition, which is what I've just been talking about. That's where it's able to look at a picture and go, oh, chair, table, something like that. But this is much more advanced than what we are familiar with. And also worth noting as well, that I believe all of these voiceover recognition features also only work on the iPhone 10 and later, because it has something called the neural engine inside of it, which takes care of all of these machine learning AI tasks. So it has this feature, and what it's able to do is, instead of saying, okay, like chair, table, person, all that, it will instead say something like, someone sitting in a chair at a table with a glass of water in front of them, or something to that effect. Or maybe if they are standing on a sidewalk, it might say, okay, person standing on sidewalk facing the street, or something like that. So it will give a more sort of detailed description of what the image actually is. And the reason it's able to do that is because it's using AI, so artificial intelligence, and neural networks, as far as I'm aware, to essentially look at the image and go, okay, so this is what the image looks like, and then it's trying to process it the same way our brains do and generate a human readable description of what it's looking at. So it's going through and saying, okay, so these are all of the different objects, and this is what it looks like this person is doing, just as an example. And it's trying to process it the same way that a normal sighted person would look at the picture and process it in their brain. And that's pretty amazing, considering that just a year ago, we didn't have that. And the fact as well that it's all on device. So there's nothing going to a cloud server somewhere. There's no processing delays. It's instant from what I've heard. And it's really, really fascinating. I can't wait to try this out and see how it works on different images. It's very, very, very cool. And I will be sure to absolutely make some videos when the final version of iOS 14 comes out. I will be sure to make some videos, in-depth videos, on demoing all of these different features. So that's image recognition. And then we have text recognition, which is kind of like what we talked about before with the how it tries to identify text. It seems like they've maybe improved it. I'm not sure. I really don't have a ton of info on that, so I can't really divulge too much info because I just don't have it. But I would assume that they've probably improved it with sort of the same algorithms. Then we have something very interesting called screen recognition. And actually, this is something I forgot to talk about before. So also in iOS 13, I believe it was 13, 12 or 13, Apple started to try and label buttons that were not labeled properly in apps. So let's say you had like a grocery or like a banking app, right? Let's say you had a banking app and one of the buttons wasn't labeled. And let's say that was like I don't know, the send check button or something, just as an example. So let's say that was not labeled. In iOS 13, sometimes it would try to tell you what it thought the button was. And most of the time, it was kind of pointless. It didn't work very well, except for very simple buttons. Like, if there was a play button in, like, a music player that wasn't labeled, it would be able to tell you, like, that the button was play. And then you'd know, okay, cool, so that's the play button. But most of the time, it didn't really work very well, and it was just not very impressive. But in iOS 14, they've really focused on this, it seems like. And again, I have not tested this. I have no idea how well it works. But I guess it's now going to be a lot better at detecting all of those different buttons. And it doesn't just work with buttons now either. It works with all sorts of controls. So sliders, I believe like text fields probably as well, like radio buttons, lists, I'd imagine, like tables, all that kind of stuff. So, and again, I'm not 100% sure because I don't have the beta yet. And I don't have the final version, so I can't test this for myself right now. But from what I've heard from Apple, there are some podcasts and articles out with Apple talking about these features. It's able to go through an app and say, okay, so the developer didn't label this button. What do we think this is? And then it will try and figure out through a ton of different things with AI and looking at the button and looking to see probably what it does to figure out what it should call it. And so when you come across those, VoiceOver will try and describe to you what the button is supposed to do or what the slider is supposed to do. And it goes even further than that, because if a developer has implemented custom controls, which is basically where they don't use any of the templates that Apple's provided them when they're making their app, and they just completely do stuff from scratch, so they design their own buttons or their own like checkboxes that are not standard for iOS, like that aren't used across the rest of the operating system. VoiceOver is able to detect those and tell you about them, which is very intriguing. So it will make those accessible as well. Also, apparently it's also able to detect invisible controls. So if there's something that VoiceOver simply can't see, this AI will make that visible to VoiceOver, and you will be able to interact with it. So this could potentially be huge. This really has the potential to make a lot of apps that would not normally be usable and turn them into accessible experiences that we're able to use. And that, quite frankly, is just amazing. It's not a substitute for making apps accessible, and from what I've heard, Apple really didn't design it with the intent of it being able to just make everything accessible. But here's the thing that I'm starting to see. With AI, even if someone doesn't design it for a specific person or a specific purpose, people are going to find a way to use it for that purpose anyway. And AI is very adaptable. So even if Apple says, okay, yeah, so we didn't design this in order for just developers to not have to do any work anymore, it might very well end up being so good that theoretically, although I don't encourage this at all, but just theoretically, developers would not have to do any work anymore, although they absolutely still should, because accessibility is very important, and developers do need to actually make an effort to make sure that their apps are VoiceOver compatible. But this is still a huge step forward, especially when it comes to things like certain games maybe that are actually they give an example in this podcast that I listened to that I'll link to as well down below in the description. But they gave an example of a game called Song Pop, which is I believe it's a trivia game where you guess specific songs, and then if you get them right, you win different things, probably points and so on. And that game that they tested this feature on was developed in a platform called Unity. And for people that know what Unity is, you know that Unity by default is completely inaccessible with a screen reader. I heard they were actually working on fixing that, but as far as I'm aware still, Unity is not something that works with a screen reader at all, natively out of the box. So, they applied this AI that's going to be in iOS 14 to that game, and they were able to make it completely accessible automatically without needing to do anything, which is huge because Unity doesn't expose any controls at all, as far as I know. I'm going to go and try this game later on to see what it's like in iOS 13 because I want to see just how inaccessible it was from the start. But according to Apple, they were able to make it fully playable, which is just incredible when it comes to being able to have equal access, especially in the blindness community where there's so much unemployment. This could have the potential to hopefully lessen that percent of blind people who are unemployed because they're now able to use some of the same software that sighted people take for granted. And again, this is not like an end-all be-all solution or anything like that, but anything that puts the blind community on more equal footing with the sighted population is a good thing in my book, and this could really have the potential to be revolutionary. I'll come out and just say it right now. It could really, really change the game. And it may actually help app developers to see where the problems are, because as far as I know, you can turn this feature on and off. So, developers can go in and have it on, right? And they can say, okay, so let's try this with VoiceOver, and they'll have it, and they'll see that VoiceOver is recognizing all these controls. And then they'll go in and turn it off probably, and then they'll go back in and see, okay, so VoiceOver recognized all those controls and now it doesn't recognize any of them. So now I know what I need to work on. Or maybe it recognizes some controls but not everything. So then they're able to prioritize and say, okay, so this is what I need to work on, to code, to make accessible with VoiceOver, and this other stuff is accessible by default and I don't need to touch it. So that could be really helpful actually for developers to have a better understanding of exactly what parts of their app need work and what parts of their app are good. Because apps can become very complex the bigger you get. So anything that helps their job take less time and be less stressful is a good thing, and hopefully that will encourage even more developers to actually sit down and take the time to make stuff usable for everybody. So yeah, that was kind of my sort of perspective on WWDC from a blindness sort of view. And I want to know what you think in the comments. Let me know, especially regarding all this voiceover recognition stuff, because I, for one, am really excited to try this out. I've really heard good things about it so far, so I'm optimistic that this time Apple will get it right. And again, this is kind of a version... Really, it's kind of a version 1.0, even though they've done a little bit of this before, but this is kind of a version 1.0 of this new advanced sort of technology here with all of this AI and being able to describe images with that much detail, as I was sort of talking about before. And again, with all this voiceover recognition for apps. And by the way, that feature is called screen recognition. That's the part where it's able to identify controls in apps and make those accessible. Also, too, just before I forget, all of what I have just mentioned works on the web as well. So if there's a website that doesn't work very well with VoiceOver, maybe there's some unlabeled links or something isn't as accessible as it could be, these features could very well be able to help with that. Especially actually with the image descriptions. I see this a lot where... actually, this happens on news sites quite often, where images, they'll have captions, but sometimes they're not very good. Like, they'll just tell you, river.png, and then they'll maybe give you, like, the photo credit for who took the photo, but they won't really give you any sort of info, especially when it comes to, like, screenshots and things like that. Like, they're not going to tell you what's in the screenshot most of the time. They're just going to say, like, a series of random numbers. So this feature with being able to recognize text and being able to recognize those images could actually really be helpful with that. So it remains to be seen, but I've heard very good things, as I've said, and absolutely when iOS 14 drops, I will do a full in-depth demo of all of these features. So with that, this wraps up this video. I'm sure there are a lot of other features in iOS 14 especially, and macOS as well, that we will discover over the next few months. Again, this is still beta 1, so we're not even at the stage yet where Apple has released more betas to talk about, so this is kind of all I know for right now. But I think I will continue this series as new info comes out. I'll keep you guys updated on what we hear, and let me know what you think of the comments of all of these features. Tell me if this kind of video is interesting. Tell me if you want to see more, and I'll be glad to do it. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next couple days for the final part of the drummer tutorial that I've promised. And until then, I will see you guys later. All right, bye-bye.